and check on who's attending live at City Hall. I also wanted to mention that we have 2 council members who have joined us so far. Councilmember Jones and Councilmember Messenger are both online as well. So welcome, and welcome to everyone. I'll go ahead and introduce our team first, and then if any of the council members want to just say a brief hello, we'll give them a chance to do that. So my name, for anyone who doesn't know me, is Louisa Leite. I am a project manager and town planner with Dover Coal & Partners. We've been working in Neptune Beach now for just about a year, working on the vision plan, and are now starting this next phase of work, which is to update the city's comprehensive plan and land development regulations. I also would like to introduce Bill Spakowski. He's a new face to the team, so you all probably don't know him yet. Bill, if you want to say just a quick hello.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm a planner from Fort Myers area, and I work regularly with Dover Coal & Partners on implementing vision plans on comprehensive plan amendments and land development regulations, just like we're starting off here.
Yes, we're very happy to have Bill on our team. He is probably the most experienced planner and most talented planner in all of Florida, so we're happy to have him on our team. I see that Victor has joined. Victor, if you want to say just a quick hello.
Just hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in tonight. Looking forward to getting on with this next important, a little bit technical, but absolutely crucial phase. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. We also have Brenda Diaz from the Dover Coal team.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm one of the town planners also working with Louisa on this project.
Wonderful. We also have our team members from WGI who have worked with us on the vision plan, who are also in attendance, Angela Biaggi and Lisa Nissensen. I don't know if you all can just say a quick hello. Hello, Angela.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Happy to be here tonight with the team.
Great.
And hello from Lisa Nissensen here, and can't wait to get started on these more technical aspects, because it really is important to get the details right about where we want to go.
Awesome. Great. Christina, if you could say hello from City Hall. Christina is sitting in council chambers, and I know there was at least one member from the public who attended in person. If there's anyone else there, just let us know, and we'd love to hear from them as well. Wonderful. So Councilmember Jones or Messenger, if you want to say a brief hello, now would be a great time. Of course, you all
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. You have joined the meeting as an attendee and will be muted throughout the meeting.
I don't know if that was that? Maybe
that was the City Hall. I muted them, but when they're ready, they can unmute themselves.
Okay. Okay, great.
Sorry about that.
No. Uh-oh, Christina, it sounds like maybe you all are trying to log back in. I know we heard you a couple minutes ago, so I'm not sure if you got kicked off, but let us know if you need any help. Feel free to just type in the chat and we'll see if we can't help you all get logged in. All right, great. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. We have about 40 people on the call so far, and I'm sure a couple more will be joining us. So today we're doing the first of several series of winter meetings and workshops in December and January. And this is the very first one, and it's meant as really an introduction into what comprehensive plans are and what land development regulations are, kind of what's the difference between the two, and why they're important for city planning in general. So with that, I'll let you all know that this meeting is being recorded. So anyone you know who was not able to attend, you of course can let them know. And we'll be sharing this meeting recording on the website. So everything that is displayed and presented will be available on the neptunebeachvisionplan.com website. And if you go to the /events page, you can see all the upcoming events, and we'll also post links to all the videos on that page as well. So this meeting is set up as a webinar. Any questions you have as we're presenting, feel free to hit that Q&A button in the Zoom window toolbar that you see that this arrow is pointing to. And we will try and get through all the questions during the session. If we can't get to anything, we will certainly follow up and try and answer it after the fact. So today we're going to be covering just the timeline and process of these next phases of work, and then again dive into what's comprehensive planning and what are land development regulations, and more specifically to Neptune Beach, what are we going to be looking at updating with the city. And then we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. So this is, like I said, our very first of these winter workshops and public meetings. We have several other meetings planned. So next week on Tuesday, there will be a meeting specifically about residential density. That'll be a longer meeting because it's a really big topic. So we wanted to give enough time to kind of workshop ideas and look at a lot of examples and talk through things. Then the following day on Wednesday, there will be a meeting that's specifically about how to get predictable development outcomes. So what tools are there in the zoning code that we can use to get more predictable development? And then there will also be on Thursday, the first of a community resilience planning workshop as well. In January, we'll have several more meetings, and all of these are getting much more specific into smaller issues. We talked a lot after the vision plan, which I know is not adopted, but we kind of regrouped with the city and we sent out a survey to ask people what they prefer in terms of public meetings. And largely we heard that, it would be better to do very topic specific meetings that are shorter and do a lot more shorter meetings so that people have multiple opportunities to engage. And if they can't make it to one meeting, they can make it to another. You can also pick and choose the topics that you are most interested in. And all of this, again, is on the website. If you haven't been on our website, please visit it. Here is the events page that you can see. Again, it has links to register and it will have links of all the videos as well. So like I mentioned, this is the phase 2 and phase 3 of our 2 years of work in Neptune Beach. Like I said, we're wrapping up the vision plan process and that should go to adoption in January. But in the meantime, we're going ahead and getting started with the updates to the comprehensive plan and land development regulations as well. And phases 2 and 3 will actually be happening in parallel. And as I explain what these two processes look like, you'll kind of see why it's useful to do them together. So I don't expect you to read everything on this slide, but I just wanted to emphasize that we're just getting started. There's a lot of key milestones coming up. We're at the very first milestone, which are these winter meetings and workshops. Through the spring, we'll be developing through the winter and spring, we'll be developing the first draft of the comprehensive plan updates, as well as the first draft of the land development regulations. Then towards the end of spring, beginning of summer, we'll be revising those drafts and coming up with our final draft. The comprehensive plan will go to transmittal. That means it'll be sent to the state for state review. At the same time, we'll be continuing our work with the land development regulations. In the summer, there's going to be more public meetings and presentations of those drafts as well. And all in all, we'll be looking to have an adopted comprehensive plan sometime in fall 2021, and later that fall, the adoption of the land development regulations. So we're going to start with a live poll, and I'll explain how this works. It's a really exciting new polling program that we're getting to use, and we're going to use it quite a bit throughout all of these meetings. So this will be our first kind of test run with you all to see how it works. So you actually get to use your cell phone to do the poll. So if you're watching at home and you have your whole family with you or your spouse with you, you both can participate in the poll just by using your cell phones. So grab your cell phone if you have it. And what you'll want to do is text to 22333. That's the number you'll text to. And you'll want to send this message, Dover Cole 516, and that'll enter you into the poll. And then after that, you'll be able to just text the answers as the poll questions come up. So I'll give everyone a chance to grab their phones and text Dover Cole 516 to the number 22333. All right. And we'll keep that instruction up at the top of the screen in case you missed it. but I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, so we have the first question, if everyone can see it. Have you participated in previous community vision plan events? Oh, it looks like it's working. Oh, we have some newcomers. That's great. Thanks for joining us tonight. So we'll give this one a couple of minutes just so that as the new people are joining in and getting in, to the polling, then we can move on to the next one. It looks like most people are familiar with the process and have participated before. Welcome back. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one here. The next question is, where do you live? East of 3rd Street, west of Penman Road, between Penman and 3rd Street, other beaches communities, greater Jacksonville area, or outside of Jacksonville? Wow, looks like we have a lot of people from east of 3rd Street. Hi, y'all.
Great. Almost everyone is from Neptune Beach. Probably only one person who's from greater Jacksonville. That's great.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna let this one move on to the next one. Next question is, what is your age? So this is just giving us an idea of who's participating and who's coming back to our meetings and that kind of thing. Wow, we have a variety of ages.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. And next question is, have you ever reviewed the city's existing comprehensive plan? So your options are several times, once or twice, never, and what's the comprehensive plan?
So this gives us a sense of, how much detail we may need to get into later on, or, some of the questions you all might have. So this is pretty encouraging that, a lot of people will have some familiarity with it, which is great. And if you don't, then you're at the perfect meeting.
Okay, great. And then our last question for this poll here is, have you ever reviewed the city's Code of Ordinances, Chapter 27, Unified Land Development Regulations? So this is the same answer, several times, once or twice, never, or what's that? Okay. Oh, we have people that are familiar with it, 50%, almost.
That's
or less
great.
now. Yeah. Great. So Louisa, whenever you're ready, I think.
Awesome.
People
Great.
have
Well,
answered.
thanks so much for that. Like I mentioned, this was some easier questions just so we can kind of practice this as a group. This again is a tool we'll be using quite a bit in our upcoming meetings as well. So great to see who's attending, where you all live, how old you are, and how familiar you are with these topics already. So just as a very kind of overall brief summary of what the relationship between a comprehensive plan and the city's land development regulations are. The comprehensive plan is a very broad policy framework, and it allows that a municipality follows when adopting local ordinances and making capital improvements. The land development regulations and other ordinances related to land development that a municipality adopts must adhere to that broad policy framework set in the comprehensive plan, but it's much more specific and detailed than a plan itself. And so again, a comp plan is something that the state mandates, and it's looking at overall growth and ensuring that the city and the county are able to accommodate any projections in growth and protect any important natural resources. whereas the land development regulations are really the tools that control what the town is going to look and feel like. So their overall objectives, like I mentioned, the comprehensive plan, the reason we have them is to manage the overall location and scale of growth and to coordinate any needed facilities and services between a variety of different agencies and cities, and of course to preserve important natural resources and amenities. Whereas the land development regulations exist as a detailed guide, standard really, not guide, for development in accordance with that comprehensive plan. But it includes a lot more detail, including zoning districts, rezoning procedures, subdivision regulations, plan development regulations, building codes, rules for what signage can look like, what landscaping look like, street design standards, and many, many other things that you would never get into in a comprehensive plan. But the two, it's important to note, the two must coordinate with each other. So anything in the land development regulations has to fit with the goals, objectives, and policies that are outlined in your comprehensive plan. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be doing, or so useful to be doing these two processes together. It minimizes the city having to go back after rezoning and update every single time there's a change, keep going back and updating the comprehensive plan. By doing the two things together, you know that they're going to be aligned and concurrent. So just an overview of the comprehensive plan amendment process. Like I mentioned, this is mandated by the state. And if you're interested in learning specifically about how the comprehensive plan process is, why we have it, and what needs to be included, you can learn more about that directly in the Florida statutes in chapter 163, intergovernmental programs, specifically part 2, which is about the growth policy, county and municipal planning, and land development regulation. So there's two main reasons that comp plans are amended. The first, if there are any changes in state requirements. So the state also has a comprehensive plan, and it has several growth management policies and land development policies. And so those are changing every so often. So city is actually required, every municipality is required to evaluate every 7 years their existing comprehensive plan to make sure that it is accounting for any potential changes in state requirements. Now, the second reason why comp plans might be amended are that there's a local desire to change zoning or land development regulations that would then require an amendment to the comp plan so that the two are in alignment. Or, there could be that there is a economic development, housing, environmental, or infrastructure realities that didn't exist before that now need to be addressed in some way in the comprehensive plan. And so when you amend your comprehensive plan, there's a number of agencies, both local, regional, and state agencies that actually review your comprehensive plan. And so a lot of the process is about coordinating the work we do at the city level with all of these agencies. And that includes the Department of Economic Opportunity that actually oversees the overall comprehensive plan process. It also includes the DEP, the State Department, the Florida Department of Transportation, regional planning councils, which in the case of Neptune Beach would include the Northeast Florida Regional Council, the North Florida Transportation Planning Organization, the TPO, and the St. John's Water Management District, as well as coordinating all this work with Duval County. So when the state receives comp plan amendments, the things that they're looking for are listed on this slide. So for example, they want to know if based on the outline changes that state roads and facilities can accommodate the traffic expected from any changes to land use. For example, can water, sewer, and drainage facilities accommodate any projected population increase? Will public schools be able to accommodate any increase in the number of students? And are any environmentally vulnerable lands being compromised by any of these proposed changes? So in some cases, in those first three, if the answer is no, the comp plan can also propose changes to public infrastructure and services in order to deal with that. So, if any proposed change in land use would lead to increased traffic or needed increased capacity of public schools, that's why this coordination happens, to make sure that all the facilities and services in place are planning for the changes you foresee through your comprehensive plan. On the other hand, these are some local considerations that a city like Neptune Beach would want to consider when updating the zoning code and land development regulations. And these considerations include, can property owners and residents easily understand what's permitted on any parcel? So how obvious and easy is it to actually use the regulations? Two, and this one is very, very important, as any land use attorney will tell you, do the proposed regulations reduce previous development rights? It's sometimes known as a downzoning, and not to say that it's impossible, but it can bring forth a lot of challenges. So anytime we're making any changes to zoning, we want to be really mindful of what the current development rights are on each property and then how those are changing. We wouldn't want to reduce the rights of any particular property. Do the proposed regulations permit development that matches the city's housing and economic development needs? Basically, if you know that you need some workforce housing, or there needs to be some injection into the downtown to revitalize it, not saying this is necessarily the case in Neptune Beach, but just a consideration that cities have, they need to make sure that their regulations actually allow for those things to happen. Do the regulations define good building to street relationships that promote walkable environments where that's desired by the community? So that's when I mentioned that the land development regulations are much more about defining the overall character of the city in a way that the comprehensive plan can't necessarily do. Do the regulations define building form in both to achieve results that are consistent and to achieve development that's consistent with the desired character of the community? Are the parking regulations prohibitive for small scale and walkable redevelopment? Do the regulations ensure that parking and stormwater are being properly managed on any given parcel? So there's many more considerations, but this just gives you an idea of how differently we approach the land development regulations and that the state approaches the comprehensive plan. So this is the cover of the city's existing comprehensive plan for those who had never heard of it or have never looked through it. Here's a peek at what's inside. Every comprehensive plan is organized into elements, which are essentially just chapters. And there are several chapters that you see here that are actually required. The existing comprehensive plan has a future land use element, a transportation element, housing, infrastructure element, coastal management and conservation element, a recreation and open space element, an intergovernmental coordination element, a capital improvements element, and a public school facilities element, which is actually no longer required. As I mentioned, the state is always changing and slightly tweaking their statutes and their requirements. So actually moving forward, the public schools facilities element is just wrapped into intergovernmental coordination. So it's not a standalone element anymore. So what will the city be updating? So first thing is a planning horizon. As you'll see, the previous comprehensive plan had a horizon of between 2012 and 2022. Typically, comprehensive plans have a 10-year plan horizon. That means that you're looking at growth and change for the next 10 years throughout the city. That's typical. Usually for the capital improvements element, you may be looking at a 5-year planning horizon. That tracks with any capital improvement program that the city also has, which typically run on 5-year horizons. So that's one thing that'll be changing, of course. We'll be looking at growth and development for the next 10 years through 2030. Again, like I mentioned, updating any state statute and regulatory changes to make sure that this comp plan reflects any changes since 2012. And then also folding in some of the recommendations for the vision plan. And so examples of that could be incorporating mentions of potential street improvement and trail projects that were identified in the vision plan in the transportation and capital improvements element. Also incorporating recommendations about open space and park improvements from the plan into the recreation, open space, and capital improvement elements. Folding in some of the recommendations for policies and programs regarding sustainability and resilience into the coastal management and conservation elements. and also some of the mobility programs and policies that WDRI helped us with throughout the vision plan process, folding that into the transportation element as well. So one of the most key things we'll be doing in the update is establishing the proper land use categories and intensities to allow for the desirable development of Neptune Beach. And that is a big part of what the future land use element does. And of course, ensuring that the future land use element is consistent with the parallel process of the land development regulations and zoning update. So like I mentioned previously, one of the key things we'll be doing is establishing proper land use categories and intensities to allow desirable development. The legend you see on the right is actually the legend from the existing comprehensive plan's future land use map. So every comprehensive plan has a future land use map, and it designates certain future land use categories that have corresponding intensities. And so in this case, residential has different density maximums. As you can see, the residential low is 0 to 5 dwelling units or homes per acre. The medium category has 5 to 10 homes per acre, and the high residential has 10 to 17. And then you have your commercial areas and recreation and conservation and several others. What's curious about the existing comprehensive plan is it only specifies one mixed-use land category, which it defines as the central business district in policy 8.14-2. That's the only category it explicitly mentions having both residential and commercial uses. However, that district is not actually mapped in the future land use map, nor does it set any density maximum for how much residential would be allowed in the central business district. So that's something we'll have to be looking into and how that relates to the zoning as well. But that's certainly something that will be flagged when it goes in front of state review that we'll have to be addressing. And really what we were trying to do through the vision plan process and now is try to really understand where the city should permit a mix of uses. And once we can figure that out, understand how much residential should be permitted and where. And so we're not going to get into that tonight. But this is really just to remind everyone and set this up for next week. Next week, we'll have a 2-hour hands-on session specifically to look at residential density, where it should be allowed, how much to allow, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that's a really important topic to a lot of people. So we wanted to, dedicate a session specifically to that. And so again, that will be next Tuesday, December 8th. Tell everyone you know. We'd love to have you join us for that. So switching gears to the existing land development regulations, again, this is located in the city's Code of Ordinances, and that's in Chapter 27, which is called the Unified Land Development Regulations, and it has a number of different articles within it. Everything from administration and enforcement of regulations to land use, which is Article 4. That's where you'll find all the permitted uses, what you can and can't do on a property, the development standards, the maximum height, building setbacks, and all of that stuff you'll find in Article 4. And there's a number of other articles that get into things like street design, rights of way, utilities, environmentally sensitive areas, parking, and non-conforming lots and uses. So per public input throughout the vision plan process, we're going to be focusing on only some of those articles. That includes administration and enforcement procedures, land use, which again is where so much of what is the building blocks of what your community will look like is located. Some of the streets and sidewalks. We're also going to be looking at off-street parking, which we know has been an issue that came up time and time again throughout the vision plan process, as well as stormwater management, which also came up quite a bit in our conversations during the vision plan process. So the key objectives in us updating the land development regulations, again, speak to what we've heard throughout this process. Where some of the issues are with the existing regulations. The first thing is we want to simplify the land development regulations, all, I don't know how many it was, 15 or 18 articles, and make it as easy to use as possible. We want to address concerns about code enforcement, which we heard quite a bit in some of our previous public meetings. We want to improve or replace the existing planned unit development ordinance, the PUD. That's something that, we've had a lot of discussions. It's one of the reasons there's been litigation issues when it comes to the 500 Atlantic site. So we'll definitely be looking very closely at the PUD ordinance as it exists today and what we can do to improve it. We also want to apply form-based code elements to a predefined area of the city to help ensure more predictable development. And that could include architectural standards. And we also want to address citizen concerns about site design, including off-street parking and stormwater management. And we want to ensure, again, that the land development regulations and zoning are consistent with the parallel comprehensive plan updates. So just to give a brief overview of different types of zoning, this is very high level, but your typical conventional zoning, which is sometimes called Euclidean zoning, the organizing principle is use. So what am I allowed to do on a given property? That's the main separator. You have residential areas or zones, and you have your industrial zone and your commercial zone. And every now and then you may have a mixed use zone where you can do a bit of everything. But overwhelmingly, the tools used to control development in conventional zoning, such as floor area ratio, setbacks, a maximum building height, they don't necessarily ensure the best outcomes. So maximum building height, for example, can sometimes lead to a lot of buildings with flat roofs because everyone's trying to cram in the most number of stories within the maximum building height, but then you end up with buildings that might not have as much character than you could have had if you're measuring height a certain way or allowing for different roof lines. Same thing with floor area ratio. That's a measure used to control the bulk of a building. Can sometimes lead to undesirable results as well. Now, occasionally, conventional zoning, cities will also add design guidelines to that zoning. And again, the organizing principle is still use, but this will add some specifications about what the building might look like how frequently there have to be openings or how much glass there has to be on the ground floor, and what kinds of articulation there should be on the surface of the building to make it look more interesting. Now, a form-based code is different from conventional zoning in that its organizing principle is building form and place types. So instead of saying, these are the different zoning districts where certain uses are allowed, you say, what kind of place am I trying to build? What kind of buildings would I like to see? And use that as a way to create your districts. So instead of maximum building height, you might have number of floors. Instead of setbacks, you might have build to lines. And it just helps give you more control about the kind of look, feel, and character of a place. So what does a form-based code look like? These are just examples. This is a regulating plan, which is very similar to a zoning map. And it sets specific transect zones, which is based on a concept that we urbanists took from ecologists, which is called a transect. So it's, imagine you're slicing through a cake or a pie, and you see all these different kinds of intensities of development, from transect 1, which is your natural zone, your natural area, to transect 2, which is a rural zone, to T3, which is a suburban zone, all the way to T6, which is your urban core. And so that gets applied to a map, which is a regulating plan that you see to the left. And obviously, these zones don't look the same depending on where you are. So, a T6 zone in Winter Park, Florida, would look very different from a T6 zone in Chicago, for example. So they don't have universal standards applied to them. It's just a tool to organize the types of places within a city. And once you've established your transect zones and created your regulating plan, then you get into the specific building type standards. And form-based codes tend to be much more visual and illustrative than your conventional zoning code. And it aims to show you exactly what's possible in terms of building types and standards, so that you know on your lot what can be done. And it, again, has several standards. It establishes lot width, lot depth, and all those can be defined in more detail depending on what the community wants. You have different street facade or frontage types that you can define as well. So you can say, okay, in this transect zone, we want to allow forecourts or dooryards or stoops. things of that nature. So all that are the kinds of things you can define in your form-based code that make it much easier to know what that neighborhood is going to look like. So if you're interested in the topic of form-based codes, we will be talking more about them next week at our public meeting on Wednesday that's called How to Get Predictable Development Outcomes. So if you're interested in this, please join us at that time. We'll be talking more about it. So there's a couple of things we still need to define when it comes to updating the land development regulations and zoning code. And one of the most important is, what is the area of this form-based code? You don't have to apply a form-based code universally throughout a whole city. You can choose where you want to do it. And so some sub areas within a city that you typically find form-based codes used are a downtown area, or potentially a commercial corridor that's you know, a lot more empty, that's been blighted, that maybe wants to be revitalized into something new. By that same token, a dead big box shopping center, a large undeveloped area, or existing neighborhoods or developed areas where you want some infill development that's based on a specific character. There are some cities that apply form-based codes throughout the whole city, and even counties that do so. But we feel in this case we're likely going to be doing it in a smaller area, and that's something that we can discuss more at one of the future meetings as well. The second thing that needs to be decided is what the relationship of that form-based code will be with the existing regulations. So there's a couple of ways to do that. If we do a form-based code in one area of town, what does that mean for the rest of the areas of town? Well, one thing we can do is, you know, replace what the existing underlying zoning was with a form-based code. The other thing you can do is you can have a zoning code that has some form-based code elements with other elements that are conventional zoning. Or you can do an optional or parallel code. That basically means that you build a form-based code that's a standalone document. It doesn't replace any of the underlying existing zoning, but developers or property owners are given the option to build under the existing code or choose to build under the form-based code. So again, we'll be defining and trying to answer those two questions of what the overall area of the code update will be, and what the relationship will be with the existing regulations. And that will be at our code framework workshop, which will be January 7th. So if you're interested in that, please come back and join us for this session. All right, so we'll do, we have one final poll question for everyone. So for those who maybe missed our first poll and didn't get the instructions, all you have to do is take out your phone, text Dover Cole 516 to 22333, and then you'll be in the poll. Then when the poll comes up, you can just type in your answer. And for those who already did the poll, feel free to just open up the same text message thread you had, and you can still use that. It'll still be active. So that, I'll turn it over to Brenda to share the last slide, our last question.
Hi, thank you, Louisa. So our last question is, what would you like the team to address as we update the comprehensive plan and land development regulations? So this one, you can actually send a whole sentence or a phrase. It doesn't have to be just one letter. So, you know, feel free to send in whatever you think. It'll pop up here as we start getting results, and you'll be able to see it. Yeah, so we have our first response, density. Great.
Yep. Come back next week. Everyone who's answering density, please participate next week on Tuesday for our density workshop.
Yeah, and that workshop will be hands-on actually. So you'll have an opportunity to speak with the planner and get into more specifics and maybe in your neighborhood, and it'll be a lot of fun.
So I see building heights popping up. Anyone interested in building height, we will have a special meeting to discuss building heights in January. And when we say building height, we're not talking about increasing the building height. It's more a discussion of how to measure the building height, so that you're taking into consideration things like FEMA flood elevation requirements, different types of roof lines, and things like that. This is great. parking, great.
Yeah. A lot of really great ideas. Thank you, guys.
I love seeing these pop up. It's just so cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brenda.
Yeah, whenever you're ready, Lisa. Thank you.
These are all being recorded too. So if you haven't had a chance to, you don't have to lock it yet, Brenda. Let the answers keep coming in.
Yeah, sounds good.
So you can keep answering. I'm going to switch back to my screen, but like I mentioned, we're still getting answers, and you can keep typing in your thoughts. All right, so with that, we've gotten through, like I said, more of these nitty-gritty topics. It's not necessarily as exciting as some of what we're talking about in the vision plan, but nonetheless very important. The next meetings in December are next week. So on Tuesday the 8th is our residential density hands-on workshop. That will be a 2-hour meeting, a longer meeting. Then on Wednesday, we'll have a meeting that specifically talks gets into more detail about form-based codes and how we can use them to get predictable development outcomes. And then on Thursday, we'll also be having, and that won't be the Dover Cole team, but there's another consultant team working on specifically resilience planning, and they're having their first of 2 workshops. So if you're interested in resilience and sea level rise and sustainability, you should definitely attend that meeting next Thursday. And with that, I'll open it up for Q&A. For those who may have joined us late, there's a Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar that you will be able to ask any questions. So I see we've only gotten one, and that's Cole. I'll go ahead and I'll just respond to that live. He's concerned about the proposed locations of the marsh walks in the plan. So the marsh walks are a preliminary concepts that were introduced in the vision plan. It's not something that will be part of the land development regulations or comprehensive plan update. It's like I said, only in conceptual phase. So none of those locations are pinned down. Any marsh walk that's built would have to go through its own process. You have to identify a funding source. There has to be design documents, studies on the impact, and all of that. So none of that is final, and it's something that, should the city decide to move forward with, is something that would be implemented through its capital improvement plan. I see we're getting another question about restricting public parking in residential beachfront areas. We did have the idea of introducing a residential permit program in the beachfront neighborhoods. That's something that was spoken about, discussed, and studied in a bit more detail by Lisa Nicholson and Angela Biaggi from WGI. And so we studied some different options for public parking and residential parking programs that would kind of restrict some of the on-street parking in the neighborhood east of 3rd for people living there, with the exception being 1st Street. So that is something that can be discussed in more detail as a part of the land development regulations.
Louisa, we had a couple of questions, if you don't mind, in the chat. Yeah, one question is, how does form-based differ from PUDs? The pros and cons.
Sure. So I'll tell you one of the main differences, and Bill, if you disagree or have something to add, feel free to chime in. So a PUD is a planned unit development, and basically it gives the city more discretionary review. So depending on how the ordinance is written, you can make it more defined. So you say exactly, the maximum of what is allowed even through a PUD process, or it can be vague, where it's really up to the elected officials and your planning board, or in this case, the CDB, to review the application and determine whether it's something they want to allow or not. This can be good if you want to have absolute control, but it's not great for the developers because they don't know if they will be approved. And so that can lead to these gray areas that will make the city vulnerable to potential litigation. again, you can have PUDs that are written in such a way that reduce that ambiguity to protect yourself against possible litigation and lawsuits. A form-based code, the beauty of it is you put and embed within the code itself the types of buildings, the character of the buildings, and the building types that you want to allow in a particular area. So you kind of know what will happen as a result when you implement a form-based code, because there are certain architectural standards you have to abide by, and only certain building types that can even be built in a certain area. So that makes it good. It's good for the developer because they know exactly that if they follow the steps and the guidance and the requirements in the form-based code, that they'll be approved. So they don't have that fear of investing in a project and planning to then be rejected. And from a city perspective, it's useful because you kind of know what you're going to get off the bat. So, Bill, what do you think? Is that a good?
Everything you said was good. I would just maybe describe the PUD process as a little bit more like let's make a deal between a developer and the council. And of course, it's done in public at public hearings, but it basically has sort of maximum flexibility, both for the landowner and for the city officials. But what you give up there is you give up predictability on the part of the citizens to know what kind of development to expect. That depends on sort of what sort of deal is made at those public hearings. So there's pros and cons of each for sure. And often our codes have a combination of both approaches, but in some ways they're, as was said, they're sort of opposites.
So we have another one, Bill. Maybe you could answer this one. Might there be a mix of conventional zoning and form-based tool? If so, are there any examples of coastal city that has form-based codes?
Yes, actually, a lot of probably coastal cities are more likely to have form-based codes than interior cities across the entire state. In part because a lot of the coastal cities like Neptune Beach have a combination of sort of historic neighborhoods that were built maybe in the 1920s or 40s or 50s, along with newer development built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so often what we call conventional zoning is for the newer areas, and form-based codes are for the older areas, because you really can't have a set of rules for one kind of development and apply it to a whole different character. It just doesn't work. So that would be a very common experience, to have one kind of zoning for the newer neighborhoods and a form-based code type zoning for the older neighborhoods and for the mixed use areas and for the downtowns.
Great. We have some, was there anything else in the chat, Brenda, before I come back to the Q&A questions?
I think those were it.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have a question about proposed parking east of First, which was shot down. But where did that input come from? It didn't reflect residents. I think this is in reference to the vision plan process. We proposed we proposed a residential parking permit program for east of First and potentially some additional parking at beach access points based on input that was received after the first draft. But we got a lot of pushback on it, so that's being removed from the vision plan. So that's where it came from, though. And if you have more questions, you can email me. I'm happy to show you exactly the public input that we were responding to when we included that. We have another question: what attorneys will be reviewing the codes? So we'll be working closely with the city attorney, as well as our team, which has extensive experience. Like I mentioned, Bill Spikowski has worked on codes for many, many communities in Florida and is an absolute expert, and has even been called as an expert witness in several cases. So, if the city would like to bring on more attorneys or land use attorneys onto the team, it's something we can look at. But this is who we have on our team right now. So between Dover Cole, WGI, and Spikowski Planning and Associates, and of course the city attorney. So we have a comment here: to protect the existing multifamily east of 3rd Street. Again, I think it would be great. That's the kind of thing we'll be discussing more at our density meeting. Specifically, where exactly do we want to allow residential and how much of it to allow where? So just because you allow something on a portion of Atlantic Boulevard doesn't mean you have to allow it on the whole corridor. So we're trying to get into the more kind of nitty gritty and specifics of, density, the D word, and but also the character of what that density could look like. There's a question about Jarboe Park, if that will be part of this process. So certainly some of the updates planned for Jarboe Park could be folded into the comprehensive plan in the recreation and open space elements. So, there's also a capital improvements element. So the Jarboe Park project, a lot of that is already in the city's capital improvements plan. And so those are all things that we'll be updating in the comprehensive plan as well in the capital improvements element. And like I mentioned, in the open space and recreation element as well. What phase will determine which, if any, options will be pursued on road changes presented in the vision plan, i.e. Penman and Florida Boulevard? So specific capital improvement projects, whether they be Jarboe Park or redesigning First Street, or whether or not to do a roundabout at the 5-point intersection on Florida Boulevard and Penman, those aren't decided as a part of the comprehensive plan and land development regulations update. Specific capital improvement projects have to go through their own processes and design processes. So most of what was in the vision plan is in a conceptual phase, which means, there may be, some of them may have some funding allocated. In the case of Penman Road, that's actually something that the city of Jacksonville will be paying for in partnership with the city of Neptune Beach. And that has its own design and public process that they're also starting up as well. And so no kind of decisions about any capital infrastructure improvements will necessarily be made as a result of updating the comprehensive plan. Now, we want to make sure that the city's capital improvements plan is reflected in the capital improvements element and the infrastructure element, for that matter, both of which are in the comprehensive plan. But that's to guide planning and help the process of acquiring funding and pursuing funding. Like I mentioned, some of those projects are not necessarily the jurisdiction of Neptune Beach. And, that doesn't mean Neptune Beach residents don't have a say in it. Like I mentioned, there are parallel processes for actually designing what exactly will end up being constructed in those specific areas. How does the city leadership, this is another question, provide input into the planning and LDRs as the process moves forward? So like I mentioned, we're going to be having this series of topic-specific meetings and workshops all throughout December and January. Anytime we hit a big milestone, like a first draft, a second draft, a final draft, that's always something that's shared with elected officials. We'll usually be presenting that in a public presentation. There will be a public comment period, both for the draft comprehensive plan and for the draft land development regulations. So there's plenty of steps moving forward to participate and provide input moving forward. Okay. More questions about kind of the overall process. Questions about the vision plan. I wasn't exactly sure what that question is about. We have questions about how many people are participating regarding input. Everything. We got, I think, up to 40 people tonight, and anyone who can't attend, we circulated a survey last month asking people what's the best way for them to participate. And most people said that they like the Zoom format. They like that they can participate from home and they don't have to go in person into City Hall, that they like that they're recorded because they can go back and see it if they weren't able to make it. And so that's largely why we've moved to this format. We've also, instead of doing a 3-day workshop, which is originally what we intended to do as a part of this phase of work, We decided to do many more, but shorter and specific meetings. So that gives, if you missed one meeting, we hope that there's plenty of opportunities down the road for you to attend at another meeting. But anything you can do to help spread the word, we're very appreciative of, especially next week. There's some important meetings and we would love to get as many people as possible involved. Okay, I think with that, we're right around time. Christina, were there any questions from City Hall? I don't know if you got your audio to work.
No.
Oof. Still getting that echo. Okay, so no questions from council chambers, where we have some other folks who attended in person. But I hope this was helpful. Like I mentioned, oh, it was misspelled. Yes, one person mentioned. The website is Neptune Beach Vision Plan, not Neptune Batch Vision Plan. Apologies for that. This is not a bachelor website.
I put it in the chat, so I'll put it in there again, and that way you guys can all have it.
Yes, thank you for that. So like I mentioned, everything will be online. This meeting will be posted tomorrow on the website. The recording of it will be, as well as a PDF of the presentation. Like we mentioned, that this is starting to get more into nitty-gritty, so we appreciate that you took the time. And some of this material is a little challenging, but we're so excited that we had everyone join us today, and we're happy to answer any more questions. You can send a contact form via the website if you have any other question that wasn't answered. We're happy to answer that. So thanks so much, and we wish everyone a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful evening.